So we could keep talking about the whole hilarious Elizabeth Warren situation. I have no problem with that. I might make another video on that, honestly, maybe in the future. But we have to talk a little more about the big picture. And I would say that as of right now, me personally, I think that if you are a Republican voter, you ought to be more optimistic. If you're a Democratic voter, I would be worried. And that's meaning that those are the parties that you would be voting for. Of course, you could just do the hard work and vote for people as individuals and determine whether they are worth voting for. Now, I'll give you, before I read through a couple articles uh, in brief, I'll give you my impression of two debates that I saw yesterday. One was between Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio and the Representative James Renacci, also of Ohio. They're running for Senate here. And that was kind of an interesting debate because you had somebody like Sherrod Brown who did tout a lot of his progressive bona fides, talking about a number of bills that he pursued and his very militant trade policy, trying to he is a pro tariff guy, and in that respect, I thought it was kind of interesting and it was a bit courageous on his part to come out and say, yeah, I support some President Trump's tariffs and I've been an opponent of free trade, etc. However, I would say on a number of other topics, Sherrod Brown kind of stumbled. He looked very insecure in his presentation. This was the first time I'd ever seen him speak, because the only other time I'd ever really heard him was on the radio. And he is more of a face for radio. Not that he's horrendously ugly, but he looks very nervous. He doesn't have a very confident countenance, if you could put it that way. But during the debate, Sherrod Brown, I think he revealed that he is basically backed into a corner. He's one of the few actual Democrats that is talking a little more about working class issues as opposed to identity issues. But unfortunately, he does have to wade in and talk, of course, support gun control, support abortion rights, support a lot of platform segments that are not popular across the state of Ohio. Now, I will tell you this, okay? I live in the most progressive county in the state of Ohio. Nevertheless, there are more people who go to church or practicing Christians in this county than you could ever imagine, okay? There's a lot of people who are, hardcore Roman Catholic or practicing, they go to a mega church, over on the west side. I went and visited some friends of mine that go to one. And I think that really Sherrod Brown is going to have an issue trying to convince some people who are practicing Christians to vote for his line of politics, because those people, some of them might have beliefs that they find President Trump doesn't represent, but the Democratic Party has pretty much become the atheist party now, unfortunately. And I think that in order to succeed in the state of Ohio, you have to be willing to, a classical liberal, which is kind of a concept that's coming back nowadays, would be perfect for this state. But Sherrod Brown isn't necessarily a classical liberal. And unfortunately, the Democrats are painting him into something that I don't know if he's comfortable being. Now, Jim Renacci, as he's called, was okay. And I wouldn't say that he was amazing for a Republican. I think that he was a little better than Sherrod Brown, but not by much in terms of his presentation. Sherrod Brown tried to represent him as kind of a corporate crony. However, one thing that was kind of annoying with James Renacci, which I think is a problem with a lot of Republican candidates, is that he focused very, very obsessively with calling Sherrod Brown a tool of Chuck Schumer, which he is. Sherrod Brown is basically a Chuck Schumer puppet in many respects now. I don't think that he always was. I believe when Harry Reid was the Senate Majority Leader, some senators were a little more independent. Chuck Schumer is a bit of a control freak and a dickhead. And I think, unfortunately, it's thanks to some people like Chuck Schumer, and he's not as bad as Nancy Pelosi in this respect, although he's a horrible politician. Chuck Schumer is going to end up getting some of his senators voted out of office. I don't think Sherrod Brown is going to lose. I think that he's going to win this November. I don't want him to win as much as I think that Jim Renacci was he handled himself pretty well. He spoke confidently, but there wasn't much real substance there. Of course, there was the standard stuff about helping businesses and talking to business owners and things like that, and making prescription drugs more affordable and things like that. From both candidates, by the way, talking about prescription drugs and opiates very deeply. However, and of course, Renacci was talking about gun rights, but really, you have to go in for the kill. You can't be one of these wishy-washy guys, and I don't think that Jim Renacci really is up to it. The guy is a congressman from Canton. He has a little bit of a personal, I think, campaign finance issue from back in 2012 that the Democrats obsess over, which was kind of a problem. I'm not going to pretend that it's like nothing happened. There was a Suarez Industries business that was actually a business called Suarez Industries that was, I think, funneling money and forcing some of their employees to contribute to his campaign. But that was, of course, 6 years ago. The government declined to prosecute at the time, and it was the Obama administration. I don't know how you're supposed to do anything about it today. Okay, I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying if they would have found anything incriminating on him, I think they would have found it back then, because they would have really loved to kick Jim Renacci to the curb at the time. The other thing with Jim Renacci is that, with what he was talking about, was that he did mention Sherrod Brown's domestic violence past, and I will, pull that up. So there was a report from, let me see if they'll let me open this. This kind of has a paywall, the Columbus Dispatch. But this is from September. So Jim Renacci rips Sherrod Brown for domestic abuse. Senator's ex-wife refutes the claim. Well, the truth of the matter is, okay, and I'm sorry for for Sherrod Brown and his family, but honestly, fuck him, because I don't know him at all. So, you know what? I'm not sorry. Fuck Sherrod Brown anyway. But I don't know if you can fairly claim that he is just a clean person, because, there was a restraining order filed against him. What the fuck do you want? So what, are we supposed to just ignore this? If you're supposed, and by the way, this is coming on the heels of the whole Me Too business and the Christine Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh. This is a little more recent. It says an independent organization linked to the Republican Party is dredging up decades-old allegations of domestic abuse against Senator Sherrod Brown, which prompted his former wife to say the use of her divorce records by the GOP is, quote, shameless and disgusting. The organization known as #MeTooOhio is spending less than $100,000 to show a 60-second digital commercial that resurrects allegations that Brown in the 1980s physically abused his then-wife, Lark. The group called, so her name was Lark Brown? The group called for him to resign immediately, comparing his case with those of everyone from Bill Cosby to former Ohio State assistant coach Zach Smith. The group filed organization papers with the Federal Election Commission just last week and listing it. So, yeah, I think this might be like one of these bullshit organizations. But the fact is that he is on the record as having a restraining order against him. The Brown campaign, which long anticipated Republicans would attempt to inject his first marriage into the race, released a statement from the former wife, now Lark Recchi, saying, "This is the first time someone has gone after my family to score cheap political points. I'm dismayed that Congressman Renacci would do something this shameless despite the fact that I've already addressed this matter. Well, yeah, I'm sorry, but once you put something into the public record and you accuse somebody of doing something, then people can use that against him. And you can't just say, well, this was just me accusing him, because what happens if this is the issue here, okay? And he's actually married, I think, happily to another woman, Connie Schultz, who used to be a shitty journalist here in Ohio for the Plain Dealer. If somebody is a domestic abuser and they are not brought to justice, and then they end up splitting from their spouse and going on to a new marriage or whatever, they will then possibly abuse the next spouse. That is the issue with this. Again, these are old allegations, but they were allegations made at the time, unlike the Christine Blasey Ford allegations. So you cannot just write it off and say, well, I didn't really think that this should be something used against this politician who happens to be my ex-husband in her case, because I forgave him. It doesn't matter at this point because it's public record. And people have a right to say, well, I don't think that this guy is really what I'm looking for. Then we're talking about the John James debate with incumbent Senator Debbie Stabenow of Michigan. That was also a tough one to judge. Debbie Stabenow, I think, made a good case, the Democrat, for a lot of the work that she did in the Senate. I think she looked very compelling. She had kind of a very homespun look, and like, I think she looked like a hardworking senator. Even though I'm not a Democrat, I would definitely say that if I was an objective, undecided voter, I wouldn't look at her as somebody I would write off. John James, who is he's a first-time candidate for office, I think also looked very good. Of course, he showed a lot of the, I guess, demeanor of somebody who is a West Point graduate and a former Army Ranger. Of course, they're going to throw in the racial element because he happens to be black. He's the Republican. She happens to be a white person. She's the Democrat. I would say at this point that, unfortunately for him, it's not going to be easy to win that race. But people were not expecting Michigan to be very competitive this election cycle, and unfortunately, I would say that we're not over the hill. We're not over that mountain yet, where candidates in these states for the Republican Party will be able to compete very well. Okay, and that includes whether it's a black Republican or whether it's a veteran or other. I think that unfortunately the Republican Party has to actually build, or even if it's not the Republican Party, there has to be built an alternative in some of these states, because honestly, granted that Donald Trump did win Michigan in 2016, you have to show the receipts for what you did in Michigan. And I'm not sure that has happened. I think that the Flint water crisis might weigh down John James unfairly. John James of course, he's not responsible for it. He's never been elected to office. But I think that he will have a very hard time overcoming Debbie Stabenow, who, maybe she's not the most shiny candidate or whatever, but I don't think that she performed bad enough yesterday for them to basically say, well, we're not going to vote for her again. So that's my impression of those two races. Now, CNN and Politico have opposite opinions here. And Dino Baydala, who's kind of a clown who's on CNN, says, Trump is doing Democrats a big favor. Say what you will about Donald Trump, and believe me, I have. I must tip my hat to him for doing what many thought was nearly impossible. This guy works for the Daily Beast, making Democrats excited about voting in a midterm election. And by doing that, Trump may actually make the Democratic Party great again. A new Washington Post poll released Sunday echoes what we saw in a CNN poll last week. Democratic voters are revved about voting in the 2018 election, it found that in terms of enthusiasm to vote this November, Democrats have a slim 2-point advantage over Republicans at 81 to 79. If you read that and thought that a 2% margin isn't much, you'd be wrong. You see, Republicans are typically excited to vote in midterm elections. For example, in October 2014, GOP enthusiasm to vote that year was at 75%, very close to the current number of 79%. But here's the real story. In 2014, Democratic excitement to vote was at only 63%. It's now up by a whopping 18 points. And a CNN poll released Tuesday found that Democratic voter enthusiasm is at its highest rate since 2009. In fact, now 40% of Democrats say they are extremely enthusiastic to vote, which is stunning considering that that number was only 5% higher in 2008, a presidential election year in which we were poised to elect the first African-American president. Plus, among demographics who tend to vote Democratic, the young and people of color, eagerness to vote is also way up. So what I notice when I read these articles is that these people have embraced exactly what I'm talking about when you were talking about Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown is a working class, marketed politician. He talks a lot about working class voters and coal miners and things like that from Ohio. Identity politics don't really help his cause. So when people hear all this stuff about people of color and young people and whatever, in Ohio, yes, we have of course we have a lot of young people, but the real issue is that you have entire areas of the state that are just looking for more jobs. They're looking for, or you know, if they're farm areas, they just want less taxation. They want more, you know, less taxation, more representation. The classic refrain from you know from the American Revolution even. So they don't really care about all that crap. And Ohio has a very huge amount of real estate that's simply farm and rural areas. Why does enthusiasm matter? Simple. Turnout is the key to success in all elections, but that especially holds true in midterms given the traditionally lower turnout than presidential elections. For example, in the 2016 presidential election, the turnout was 55%, while in the 2014 midterms, we saw only 36.4% voter turnout. So, you know, this is CNN, and they want to make it seem like the Democrats are really riling people up or getting people out. But in reality, this is from Politico, which I think is to some extent more believable than CNN, although sometimes I wonder. And it says, we've got Latino problem, Dems fret midterm turnout in key House districts. But how could that be? I mean, you saw that Dino Bedala is enthusiastic about young people and people of color going out to vote. I would say that that's a very simplistic way of looking at how voters are. I have never heard anybody that I work with who is Asian, and I've worked with a number of them, ever mention anything about voting, and they're definitely not interested in politics. Most of the time when I talk to Asian Americans, they'll talk about literally anything else. It's almost as if politics is kind of a joke and a sideshow for them. And they'll usually talk more about basketball or about food. And then when you talk about the Hispanic people that I do know, again, the same thing. There's a few of them that are a little interested in politics, not so much of an obsession. Voting, I don't know. The guy I work right next to on one side at work is a Puerto Rican, nice guy, almost no interest in politics. And in fact, I would say he said a couple of things that have made me suspect he might be a little more on the conservative side. For example, saying that this is the greatest country ever. Why would you ever want to live anywhere else? Which, you know, I think is an interesting statement because we weren't even talking about politics when he said that. And I don't even talk about politics at my job. So it says Latinos make up at least 20% of the population in more than a dozen districts. The top Democrats House target list in 2018. More than half of the 23 seats Democrats must flip to take over the House. But a political analysis of over 20,000 interviews conducted with battleground district voters by Siena College And the New York Times shows that Latinos rated themselves less likely to vote than both white and black voters. 2/3 of white voters surveyed said they were almost certain to vote. The highest rating on a 5-point scale. That must piss off the guy from Very Smart Brothers yesterday who said, oh, Taylor Swift should be telling less white people to vote. As did 61% of African Americans. So they're both in the 60s. But only 55% of the Latinos polled said the same about their plans for next month's midterm elections, according to Politico's analysis. The findings echoed by other public and private polling groups from groups like Latino Decisions, the Latino-focused polling and research firm whose latest survey showed that more than half of Latino voters have yet to be contacted by a campaign or party group ahead of the midterms, could have an outsized effect in a crescent of battleground House districts running from Texas to the West Coast, where the Hispanic vote is especially important. Democratic operatives are concerned that Latino engagement is better than it was in 2014, but not as strong as 2016, and we need closer to 2016 enthusiasm level to flip many of these seats in Texas, California, Florida, and Nevada, said Josh Ulibari, a Democratic pollster who works on races throughout the country. Among Democrats, there continues to be a fear that we're not doing enough to turn out Latinos. We've got a Latino problem, and we continue to have a Latino problem. The problem could be particularly acute in California, where Democrats should absolutely be worried about Latinos, said Paul Mitchell, a nonpartisan data consultant. Latinos make up 1/5 to 2/3 of the population in 7 contested California districts, making them one of the most important factors for Latino success, for Democratic success. I will say with this, okay, there was the Texas State Senate special election, and that happened just a couple of weeks ago. That was so this happened, and there was a Republican, and again, this is for a small state Senate seat in southwestern Texas, and a Republican upset Pete Gallego, who is a veteran Democratic politician in a very solidly Democratic area. Okay, so Texas State Senate District 19. Let's look up that map. It is actually pretty large, by the way. Let me see if I can find the map. So this is from Texas. Here's the statewide maps, and it takes a second to load. So this is State District 19, all this purple down here. So this entire section of Texas, people just didn't show up. And these are special elections, and that's something important to remember. People do not necessarily show up for special elections anywhere. So these Democrats who are supposedly all fired up in order to keep their momentum going to do whatever. Okay, this is the, let me see if I can increase it. This entire area, Terrell, Texas, Brewster County, Valverde, Maverick, all these counties over here, okay, that are not quite, El Paso's over here. This is Beto O'Rourke's area. All of this area voted for basically a Republican, but not in very huge numbers. And if that type of enthusiasm is going to continue into November, the Democrats are in a very big pinch. And in fact, it could suggest that there's a little more enthusiasm among the conservative Hispanics who happen to be, there are, I would say probably among Mexican Americans, there is an advantage for the left. But there is a growing segment of that demographic that is conservative. Okay, I would say that it's kind of a battleground demographic if you want to play that game. But here's another issue that I'd like to talk about. And with that, I think we'll close, okay? The Republicans, if you look at the maps, okay, people are talking about all of these these Senate races, of course, all across the country. And there's a difference between the battle for the Senate and the battle for the House. You see, in a normal election year, that includes, a normal midterm or presidential election, an even-yeared election, there are 33 Senate races up for grabs. This year, I think there happen to be 35 because two are special elections. It would be Minnesota and I would say Mississippi. So Minnesota and Mississippi both have special elections because their senators are retiring, or of course there was Al Franken in Minnesota had to resign due to the groping scandal. So here's the issue, okay? You look at these states where the Republicans are focused on keeping control of the House. This is the issue with the Republicans, okay? They want to win, of course, races in Montana. So the race in Montana they want to win. They want to win the race in North Dakota, which they are almost certain to win now. They want to win the race in Florida, which is a pretty tough race to predict. They want to win. They want to win races in Indiana, Florida, Missouri, Montana, and probably also where was the other pickup? Yeah, I think that was it. So those four races are their key pickups. Now, the two races that the Democrats were hoping to pick up the most, or the four, were Nevada, Arizona, Tennessee, and Texas. At this point, I would say that there's no hope for them to win either Texas or Tennessee. Those will probably be going a deeper shade of red in the near future. Of course, there's no hope of them winning Utah with Mitt Romney running, who is a piece of crap. And Wyoming or Nebraska, those are going to go solid Republican. And then the two races that they may try to pick up are Nevada and Arizona. Now, in Arizona, their candidate, the candidate for the Democrats, her name is Kristen Sinema, is losing momentum. There's a number of videos, kind of, what would you call them? I would call them found footage videos where she's calling, she's saying that I think Arizona is like the meth head of America or something. I don't think that in the end she's going to be able to pull it off. People are going to be looking at her and saying she's kind of a wacko. She doesn't deserve to be in the Senate. And there are wackos running on the Republican side as well. There was, of course, that guy in West Virginia, Don Blankenship, who's a lunatic. West Virginia will likely remain under the Democrats with Joe Manchin, although progressives will now start to ask what's the advantage of having Joe Manchin as a Democrat. He virtually, a lot of the bills he votes for almost as if he's a Republican. The other race that is a toss-up that the Democrats are hoping to pick up is Nevada, with Joe Heller or Dean Heller trying to fend off challenger Jackie Rosen. Nevada, I think, will more likely be closer than Arizona, although I think if Trump starts to campaign, and he has already campaigned in Nevada, for House seats, in order to pick up House seats there, I think Heller could get some coattail magic off of him and win. Dean Heller isn't that impressive of a candidate. He was one of the big holdouts during the Obamacare debate. Eventually, he did vote for the bill that was proposed. I wasn't very impressed by him at all. But I think that in this climate, this time, I don't think Nevada is really a state that will vote progressive, in my opinion. In fact, I think that the House races that are up for grabs there, and I made a separate video about that, the House races in Nevada, where the Republicans will be trying to pick up seats, could help Heller fend them off. Now, in terms of the House, we're not going to look at a House map at the moment because there's just too. Well, we'll just look at it for convenience sake. We're not going to analyze it. However, I want to discuss a little bit. So you can see these four districts that are Republican, that are Democrat, are now looked at as toss-ups or likely to fall to the Republicans. 2 of them are in Minnesota. 1 of them is in Pennsylvania. There are more Republican districts that look like they're going to fall to the Democrats, of course, because the Republicans are defending more, so they have to fight for more. There's for example this one in Minnesota. However, I would say that you are going to have more districts in Nevada as well as Colorado that will be harder for the Democrats to hold on to. You're also going to see issues of, here in California, for example, there are going to be a lot of Californians that will go out to vote in the governor's race for the Republican because they're tired of basically this Jerry Brown regime that's been there, and of course there's also Gavin Newsom isn't very popular in some parts of the state. So I expect the Republicans to be able to make a number of holds in these areas. Now I want to also say this before we close. The disadvantage that the Republicans have is that in the Senate they only have to defend a certain number of seats. I believe they have to defend a total of 10 seats compared to 23 that the Democrats have to defend. In the Senate, the Republicans have to defend a total of 237 seats. A lot of them are safe seats, okay? So, let's not pretend that they have to put a lot of effort into some seats. For example, in Central Ohio, a lot of these seats are simply going to be complete and total domination by the Republicans. And vice versa for the Democrats. My district, for example, is heavily Democrat. But it's almost like finding a needle in the haystack. You have to really go after people and chase them down and get your name out there. And it's not a statewide race, and people are basically saying, "Oh, we don't even know what's going to be." People don't even know who the candidates are. Sometimes they don't know which party they represent. So I am going to go out on a limb and say that the Democrats still have a good chance of narrowing the lead in the House. Of course, they probably will narrow it to some degree, but narrowing it to the degree that it will be very hard for the Republicans to govern. But I think that the Republicans could probably pull out a House victory. Most of it will be probably the result of stupid moves by Democratic politicians on a national level. People like Chuck Schumer, people like Elizabeth Warren, not necessarily people like Sherrod Brown, who I think did as well as he could. It wasn't an impressive performance, but he didn't seem completely incompetent, and he seemed like he was able to fend off a number of attacks. Those people are, in some of these other states, like Indiana, it's going to be very hard for them to really put up a formidable defense when they're looked at as part of the tapestry of a party that's kind of losing its cohesion. The Democratic Party does not have a united look right now. The Republican Party, even if you're a Democrat, and I'm pretty sure there's a few Democrats or other progressives that are watching this, you would have to admit that the Republican Party is more united at the moment than the Democrats are. So that's about it. I do want you guys to know that this analysis is going to be kind of evolving, and we do have plans probably to collaborate with some other people on some analysis on this. Could be a couple live streams this week, by the way, on unrelated topics. But please like this video, share the video, contribute to the Patreon, which I think will be in the description. Also, share the video and subscribe to my other channel, Razor Ray Live Wounds. Comment when it uploads. See you later.